Okay, I'm going to welcome all of you. I'm Fabienne Dattner, and we might wind out the music, and I want to thank you all for coming to this session, and I send my love out to you all. I see some familiar faces, some new people. We've had an amazing response to this session, which suggests it's possibly worrying many of us, how we're having conversations that have to be had in a way that makes us feel like we are actually progressing outcomes that matter to us. So before we start, what I hope to be a very practical session for you, I'd like to do an acknowledgement to country. The Dattner group come to you from Wurundjeri territory. In our context, we acknowledge leaders, past, present, and emerging, and traditional owners and Torres Strait Islander people who may be on the call. I wish, as an activist, as a leadership expert, as a weeny bit of a pirate, that we had greater wisdom in many of the ways we interact with one another. And I think this session will give you tools and hopefully inspiration to what you can do to more effectively deal with those really big conversations that you're struggling with. I want to let you know that we're going to cover three key bags. What happens in your head when you have a perception that a conversation is difficult? Number two, ways to reframe your own thinking. And number three, some critical recipe elements that need to be in play if we are to be effective getting the outcomes we're tracking for. Now, a little bit about me in this context. I'm going to assume most of you have a good idea of who I am, who Dattner Group are, and as a leadership expert and as an activist for a more sustainable world, and as someone who believes deeply that the practice of leadership that got us to where we are today is not sufficient to get us to where we want to go. And that is not a criticism of people, it's a criticism of the practice of leadership. I don't know that it's romanticizing it that once upon a time, we knew better in smaller communities how to have conversations that mattered to a community. But I think we're living in a time where those tricky, difficult conversations are being shied away from left, right, and centre. Not because we don't think that they matter, but because we don't feel particularly well equipped to have them. Or we find ourselves not only not having those conversations effectively, but being caught up in conversations we know are going pear-shaped. For me, I can't think of a more important skill right now for us to be building. I'm sure most, if not all of you, are aware of the UN report that came out only a week ago, giving us an update on the state of the planet. And the picture has got materially worse. I'm a great fan of science. You can't use it selectively. We're using it now to come together on this really important topic. So we should pay attention to the global scientific opinion about the next decade. And that next decade could be a defining one for our species, for us, for our families, for our workplaces, for our children, for our children's children, for the children of other people. And so having these conversations needs, in my opinion, to be a skill we build quickly and effectively, men and women alike. It's a subject that should be taught in schools. So three things. What happens when you have a perception that you are having a difficult conversation or you need to have one? What happens in your head? And that is 70% of an effective, difficult conversation is actually the way your brain patterns threat. And what happens when you feel threatened? The second is how to reframe your thinking. And the third is some critical elements that we need to change. I'm just making sure I'm setting my timer so I manage to get through all the elements we want to give to you today. So we're going to share slides. That is never my preference. So I want to make sure you all know how to move the screen so you can still see me or you can see the audience. And we invite you to have your cameras on. I know there are a lot of people here today, but I think having your cameras on is a way to connect. You simply cannot, absolutely cannot have a crucial conversation on email or with someone who's got their camera off. You can't share critical information that will lead to a crucial conversation in an email or with cameras off. Difficult conversations need us to connect to one another if we are to have them effectively. Even when you're sending out information that other people might see as critical, you make sure you have followed up within 24 hours with a human contact. So when does a conversation go crucial? I'm going to ask Twee, we're going to share the slides with everyone, and we'll be sending out a summary of this to you all. So don't feel that you have to take frantic notes, although it's a good way to remember what stands out for you. So do you all know how to slide your screen so you can see the slides but still see the audience? Hands up if you don't know how to do that. Okay, so hover your slide to the right, Kylie, thank you for doing it for everyone who can't do it. Hover your slide to the right of the PowerPoint and you should see a pale grey bar appear on the page. You can slide that slide to the left or to the right. So Kylie, I hope you've been able to do that. You just hover to the right of the slide and you'll find there's a pale grey bar. Next slide, please, Twee. Thank you. Wonderful. See, I've shared something with you already. Yippee. So let's just be really clear what a critical conversation is. And this is as relevant at home when you and a family member are not resolving who's picking up their laundry off the floor or who's trimming their beard over the sink or who is or isn't washing up and cleaning up the sink afterwards, as it is to a conversation with someone you work with, someone who works to you, a more senior leader, or between senior leaders. These are the three things that tell you a conversation has become critical. Number one is your perception of the conversation. The facts around the conversation differ. That's the first warning sign. The second is, sorry, this is the next slide, where you have differences of opinion. The second is where the impact of that difference and the decision you want to make has a significant outcome. Now that's crucial. There has to be a significant outcome. And who would think that an argument with a partner about washing up or cleaning that little thing in the sink that gets all the gunk in it or putting the rubbish bins out can have a significant impact, but it absolutely can because of what it's attached to. And the third thing is emotions are running high. Those are the three critical aspects of what will determine a conversation's going critical. And the next thing is, how do you know you're in that conversation? Next slide, Twee. Three things. Number one, we're not getting the results we want. So if you're having an argument with a team member about an expectation, if you find yourself getting irritated at accountability in a team, if you find that you've been intimidated by a more senior leader and where you came into a conversation with goodwill, you don't feel so good about that conversation anymore. Or if you are at an executive table and you are not seeing outcomes that you expect, or with stakeholders in community, that is a sign the conversation is tipping. You can't resolve it by thrusting facts down people's throats. You have to stop and you have to recognize in this conversation, in this piece of communication, first step, we are not getting the results I or we want. In fact, second step that tells you it's going crucial, we're getting results we don't want. at its silliest, and this is true in the biggest conversations and the smallest, you're in a partnership or in a house share, and there's an agreement about who cleans the kitchen after a meal if one person's done the cooking. And you find the washing up's done, but nothing else is done around cleaning up. The benches aren't wiped down, the sink's not cleaned. And of course, when you do it, you do the washing up, you probably put it away, you clean the dishwasher if you've got one, you wipe down the benches, you clean out the plug, and of course you change the water for your pets so it's nice and fresh. The other person does it, they just do the washing up. And this has happened repeatedly. So the first thing is there was an agreement to clean up properly and we're not sticking to it. That really irritates the living bejesus out of you because we had an agreement and I'm doing my part, you're not doing yours. So when I say you are getting results you don't want, the result is irritation is something you don't want to feel. More importantly, when you raise it again, possibly in a slightly aggressive way with the other person, they get defensive. They feel irritated. That is a result you also don't want. Then we get stuck and the conversation keeps repeating. It happens in our homes. It happens, worst place of all, in emails. You cannot have a crucial conversation on email. If someone sends you something provocative on an email, do not respond to the email. Pick the phone up, organise 5 minutes to talk to someone. You can't pick up crucial conversations if you respond as if there's a threat in an email. So the three things are: we aren't getting the results we do want, we are getting results we don't want, and it feels like we are stuck. So this next slide is the big one. This is all about where we are emotionally triggered in response to somebody else's behaviour. And the big words I would write down in front of me if I were you is any time you find yourself blaming and judging someone else, you are in a triggered emotional state. The chances of you thinking logically or rationally or fairly or compassionately or kindly are dramatically reduced. When you are blaming or judging another human being, you're deflecting your responsibility to go meta to the conversation. Going meta to the conversation is going above the conversation. When I have an emotional response to another person, what happens is I am no longer thinking through what they need and what I need. I'm just thinking defensively. How many times do we have to do this conversation? You don't listen to me. You simply don't listen to me. Listen, we sat down in the meeting last week and we set the outcomes and they haven't happened. This is really disappointing. Power word. I have a board meeting tomorrow, power word, and I'm not prepared for it. Now, that's what you want to say, but in a triggered state, you do say it, and it's not constructive. Now you will get both an emotion you don't want and a reaction you don't want. And that's what sticks your conversation. The second thing we do, and perhaps this is more common for the women in the room, but what we can do is we accidentally blame and judge ourselves. And my darling ones, that's no better than blaming and judging anyone else. When I blame or judge myself, I feel horrible. As I blame and judge myself, I should have, I could have. Now I feel guilt. And guilt as an emotion is all about our responsibility to another person. I've let someone down. Or I feel shame. And shame is materially different from guilt. Guilt sometimes gets human beings doing the right thing together. Shame just makes us feel awful about ourselves. I'm a bad person. This is my fault. So you have to know what your triggers are, and you have to think through, am I in a resourceful state to have a difficult conversation or a crucial conversation? And if I'm avoiding the conversation, chances are you go back to the slide, which is, I'm not getting the results I want, and I am getting results I don't want, which tells you you're stuck. So you have to stop at that moment and breathe. You have to make this about you, not the other person. In my experience working with men and women in lots of different contexts, in organizations, at executive team level, which I do a lot of work in senior teams. If it's in senior to middle manager, which DG does a lot of work on, or it's just one-on-one coaching. When you are in that space, we park what is happening with everyone else and we just focus on you. Because if you're not feeling resourceful, you can't manage the conversation. And if I could wave a magic wand for all of you, that resourcefulness would be where you invest time and money in yourself. So the tips of it are, watch out for blame and judgment in yourself or others. The second tip is watch out for old stories. Old stories often show up in families. Oh, be a good girl. Follow what the lead is. You know, you don't agree with it, but just do your job. Old stories can also be, I arc up. I get, you know, in our family, you fight for that outcome. Go in there and bulldoze your way through. Also not helpful. Old stories can be, look, I've never been someone to speak up in that way. Or I'm always worried that I'm going to upset people. And I just want to see a bit of a show of hands on this. Hands up who worry a lot about upsetting other people. Just pop your hands up so I can see. And keep your hands up because I want to have a look at we've got a few screens going. Keep your hands up. Oh, good. It's even better if you use the device down below. Keep your hands up. Okay, this is an example of probably our biggest concern and why we're doing this is that in an emotionally triggered space, we often don't do what we could do for fear of doing something we never do. If you put your hand up then, what we know about 92% of you is if you're someone who worries a lot about upsetting other people, the chances of you having upset someone is very slim. It's unlikely. In fact, in your own spot today, you can think back, well, actually, when did I last upset someone? And the answer is, I haven't, not in the last month at least. Well, have you upset someone in the last 6 months? Obviously, you cause a lot of problems. You're very adversarial. And then you go, no, actually, I don't upset people. So what your belief or fear of upsetting people does is it stops you taking constructive action to resolve conflict when in fact you could. For those of you who know you get a little belligerent when things are going pear-shaped or oppositional, you start to argue your way into a situation, that is also emotionally triggering. If you're someone who sees yourself as a bit of a perfectionist, you're needing to see the detail and forcing through that there is a right way to do what we're doing, then you're also in a triggered space. In conflict, you have to believe there's never an absolute right way. And my job is to understand where the other person's coming from, not to try and prove a point. So in many ways, there are three positions, well-documented positions in conflict. They are villain, I'm the aggressor, I'm causing the conflict. Victim, I haven't got a voice, I'm afraid to speak up. Or hero. And the hero in that famous above below the line little cartoon, which maybe I'll get Sarah or Twee or one of the team to post the link to so you can go and download it after today. But that inspiration or limitation of going above the line and saying, how can I influence a constructive outcome? Or below the line, where I go into a very defensive space. So why are conversations triggering? Because we attach a story to the conversation. So I'm going to show you something really interesting if you haven't seen it before. Next slide, please, Twee. All emotions that you feel, says she trying to reenact a slide, all emotions that you feel have a root cause and rule. So you could know in a difficult conversation, if you're becoming sad, then you feel like you're losing something. In a relationship, I'm losing connection or relatedness. In a team, I'm losing my sense of place. In a meeting, I'm losing visibility, and I really value that, and I feel sad about what I'm losing. Anger is triggered by someone or something coming between you and something you absolutely want. And so when you're angry, you aren't thinking about the consequence on someone else of the anger. There's just a fight to get back something I want. And that's why anger is very explosive, and why sadness is often very hidden, or it comes out in tears. Both anger and sadness have rules. Happiness, on the other hand, is triggered by things going as you hoped or expected. So you feel good. Feeling happy keeps you resourceful in a complex conversation. Surprise is triggered by something that happens that you weren't expecting. Contempt, the most difficult point in a conflict, is triggered by people rather than objects. It's bound with a feeling of superiority, and it can be a precursor to anger. Now, we put this in because in relationships, if contempt is the dominant feeling, get help. For counsellors, coaches, contempt is the one emotion where we will say that relationship has broken down. Contempt is a dismissive emotional state. Anger is fleeting. Most of your primary emotions last for 2 to 6 seconds. Contempt has a lot of content attached to it. Fear is triggered by something approaching us quickly, the sudden loss of support or threat or plan. So fear in a difficult conversation can be when you are someone who doesn't like conflict and you find yourself in conflict with an aggressive person. You think mistakenly that a very aggressive person is directing it at you. It might look like that, but actually they're trying to control the data, the situation, or the job, or a position. They can't see you when they're angry or aggressive. By the same token, when you become silent or passive, your worries are all about people, and you've forgotten about what am I trying to achieve. Disgust, which is a primary emotion that protected us once upon a time from stuff that was poisonous or toxic or bad, like poo or wee or vomit or something that had gone off, is now when someone or something violates a principle or a value. Now, just remember, I can be disgusted by someone's behavior, but I can be totally wrong about their intention in behaving that way. So disgust, sadness, anger, all these primary emotions can lead to a critical conversation, but it doesn't mean that your understanding of that conversation is actually accurate. In fact, until you map over the entire possibility, is your emotional state is not accurate. Now, what happens to an emotional state is we add a big story to it, and that story is triggered by the emotion. So we give you the SCARF model, which we will strongly recommend you look up. Next slide, please, Twee, which shows how people are responding to an emotional trigger. Is my trigger my position? Do I feel that I am respected or seen in my position, or am I undermined? Men more comfortably relate to status, but I'll tell you something interesting. Both men and women can be triggered by status, which is about power and control and influence. At its best, it helps you get outcomes. At its worst, it can take you into an aggressive space in a difficult conversation, or you check out. Certainty. And by the way, one of the best ways to know what your trigger is to think how you responded to COVID. For myself, I'll take you through this and share my own triggers on this, which have helped me hugely. Certainty, which was a trigger for huge numbers of people in COVID, relates to how sure we are about events, that we can do some prediction about how events are rolling out. And you are triggered into a critical state when you just don't know. The job is not clear, the delegation's not clear, you're not clear of the mood above you, you're not clear of somebody else's intention in a conversation. And certainty in any context helps clarity, but is also triggers anxiety and fear. Autonomy is a huge trigger. The more you may feel able to make choices for yourself in a critical situation, the more it brings out the best in you. Where you're losing autonomy, you might get stubborn and rebellious. You might feel like, I can't make a difference because I didn't get to choose what I'm currently having to do. Relatedness is you want to know that the people coming towards you are friend, and it collapses when you can't tell whether they're a friend or an enemy, a friend or a foe. If relatedness takes you to your highest self in a critical conversation, if you don't know whose side people are on, or if I'm being supported, it will take you to a fearful or defensive space. And finally, fairness, that we are sure in this context that all voices are heard, justice and right and wrong and how it affects us are clear, or actually it's not fair. I'm no longer clear on those things. I can't feel where I'm involved or heard or listened to. And so I'm triggered to a lack of fairness or unfairness. For me in COVID, do you remember that first period of the massive lockdowns? Let's see a show of hands in the room. Who thinks that your sense of status was triggered in the lockdowns, the big lockdowns? Hands up if you feel that status was triggered, your power over your choices was diminished. Okay? Who feels that certainty was triggered during COVID, the lockdowns? That should be a lot of you. Pop your hands up. Great. Hands up who feel autonomy was triggered. Great. So, that 5-mile radius was imposed and you went, look, I probably would do that, but don't tell me to do it. You let me have control over that decision. What about relatedness? Found you were really struggling, you're in isolation in an apartment or a home, or you suddenly found yourselves in lockdown with a person you never expected to be in lockdown, and all the relationships you had weren't there. Hands up, were affected by that. I'll give you a good trigger on this is, we all got an hour's exercise and you're out for a fabulous walk and you're on the walk and then you see people coming towards you and suddenly everyone veered away from everyone. Even though you had masks on and you're outside, you gave each other a good 2-meter berth. Do you remember that? And finally, fairness. And for many people, fairness is how we dealt with autonomy and certainty. Look, we don't know the answers. I prefer to make choices for myself, but in this instance, it's fair that we do the right thing by others. Okay, next slide, please. So, you have to challenge yourself and you have to stop. You have to be willing to challenge yourself. Then you have to choose an approach. And the very famous Byron Katie questions, who's a therapist, a Canadian therapist, helping people who are stuck. And she poses the first question to people trying to work out, are they stuck? Is what you are thinking true? And you can only answer yes or no to that question. Is what I am thinking about Twee true in an interaction that went crucial? Well, let's say Twee was late to a meeting. Twee and I work together. Twee's late to a meeting. And I think people should be punctual for meetings. And Twee was late. Therefore, I think Twee is rude. Because only rude people are late for meetings, because my rule about meetings is you arrive on time. Twee, on the other hand, doesn't have that rule. She's got the 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after, that's fine. I'm not neurotic about start times, but more importantly, one of my friends was sick and I was helping them. That's where she was coming from, but I apply a rule, so I think she's rude. Byron Katie's second question is, are you sure what you think is true? Are you sure what you believe to be true is true? Now, the theory behind that second question from Byron Katie was, actually, when you're challenged twice to say, can you be sure that's true? I want to say yes because I'm feeling grumpy. But the reality is you can't be sure what another person is thinking is actually true. You just can't be sure. So do I think Twee's rude? Well, no, but she was late for a meeting. Well, yes, she was late for the meeting, but you don't actually know why. So if I'm stubborn, I'm going to say she's definitely rude because she's done it 3 times to me. The third question is, how does it make you feel believing that thought is true? Wow, it makes me feel grumpy, irritated, frustrated. I waste the first 5 minutes of every meeting. I feel disconnected from Twee. And then comes Byron Katie's great question, is who would you be if you didn't believe that thought was true? And now a little bit of smoke comes out your ears and you go, what? Hear the question again. Who would you be if you didn't believe that thought was true? Well, probably I'd not be judging Twee. I wouldn't be irritated. I'd probably be a bit more curious to try and find out. Sorry, that is my lovely husband ringing me. I'd be a bit more curious about trying to find out why is she late and if there's something we can do about that. Now, it's not complex to see which of those 2 responses is more useful. They are both made up. Being curious about Twee, however, is going to be more useful than being judgmental. If I blame and judge her, I paralyze myself to do something constructive. So Byron Katie invites you to say, who would you be? Now, I know everyone online here has a conversation that's deeply triggering. I'm not asking you to tackle the biggest critical conversations in your life. I want a divorce. I hate my father. I'm angry with my best friend. The team I'm in is not working. My manager is a bully. I don't have a voice on my team. Start simply to experiment with some safe locations using those 4 questions because they help reframe your thinking. And the crucial element here is stopping yourself, rethinking, and choosing a more effective response. If you find yourself, next conversation, please, Twee, in a difficult conversation, there are 3 you probably need to have done. Before the conversation, you have to think in 3 different contexts. Me, what do I want from a conversation? You, the other person, what do they want? And then us. What is the best outcome for us? In my experience, critical conversations happen because all I'm thinking about is me, and all the other person is thinking about is me as well. So we are not going to resolve this. The fight or disconnect is inevitable. Before a difficult conversation, I have to say to myself, what's happening in my head? What do I want? If I want to prove a point or to prove I'm right, why do I want that? I want to be respected for what I have to say. Well, that's a better purpose for a difficult conversation. If you want to prove you're right in a conversation, you're still stuck. But if I want to create a space where I'm respected and heard, that's a different strategy. If I want to be respected and heard, what do you imagine the other person wants? Then you can start to think about how do we have that conversation so we both get that higher order conversation. Just yesterday, I was running one of our Compass program, second module. And we were coaching, big group of women, we had 38 people in the program. We're coaching people on how to have these conversations. And we're giving people a big recipe. We spend a lot of time on this in the program. We're giving them a big recipe. And even so, there are 2 people who keep falling back to, but it's not fair, it's not right, I was bullied. Well, even in an extreme situation where it is true that you are a victim of somebody else's behaviour, you can't go in trying to prove a point, much as you might wish you could. If you want to get the outcome you really want, you have to go meta and you have to recognise, I have to stop myself, I have to challenge my approach, and I have to choose something that will keep the conversation going. If the other person feels respected and heard, then you have a much higher probability of being respected and heard yourself. The second thing that happens is during the conversation, if there is one thing you need to stay deeply alert to, is keeping the conversation safe. The minute it veers off course and becomes defensive or angry or hurt, stop the conversation. You will not win that conversation with data. Until you are in a respectful position with each other, no amount of data will win the day. Hierarchy will win the day. My power over you, I'm more senior. Fluency will win the day. I can speak faster and quicker and more effectively than you, but data won't last. The data doesn't stick. If I use positional power, I diminish the other person. If I over-talk them with my data versus their data, it's just argumentative. It has to be our conversation. And psychological safety in a difficult conversation is much more about the shared content and shared contribution and the context of the conversation. So in a mutually neutral location, not a corridor conversation, not in a meeting with lots of other people. And finally, after the conversation, the gift of good conversation is we get an agreement. We mutually agree to something and you have a plan. Well, having the plan is an outcome of the conversation. Checking in on and monitoring progress on the plan is the key to success. We have a good plan, we monitor it, and we follow through. Now, creating psychological safety. Next slide, please, Twee. What is crucially important in creating psychological safety is that we have a shared purpose. You can't expect to manage a difficult conversation by rushing in with, that email was really rude and it was wrong. And I email back with a defensive email. It just won't work. That will take you to a heightened, difficult conversation. I can't win a conversation by saying something like, we've had this conversation before. How many times do we need to have this conversation? How often do I need to say, can you pick your clothing up off the floor? It's a great argument in families that some people really care a lot about a tidy house and some people don't care at all. Wanting a tidy house doesn't make it the right thing to do. It just makes it what you prefer to do. Having a messy house doesn't make it the right thing to do. It's just what you prefer to do. To have a crucial conversation, you have to come to the conversation with a shared purpose. And in a relationship, the shared purpose isn't picking up clothing or keeping the house tidy or having agreements about washing up. The shared purpose is, what sort of relationship do we want? I think it might be really helpful if we come together to talk about the relationship we want. We want to be caring, constructive, loving, compassionate, kind, tolerant, fun. How do we create that relationship? How do we behave if those values are alive and well? And only when you've created that shared purpose can you now talk about those occasions when it's not working. And together with the purpose in mind, you can now solve the problem or solve the problem more easily. But you can't solve that problem by confronting the data. All you will create is more conflict. And the other thing is you have to have mutual respect. Now, that's a big deal. I don't respect my boss. I think he's an aggressive. You can add the adjective you like. You know, I just don't. I think they're just a horrible person. Byron Katie's 4 questions. Is what you're thinking true? Can you be sure it's true? How does it make you feel believing that? It scares the living daylights out of me. I'm not game to challenge them. So when I do challenge them, I suddenly explode. There's no respect. I just think they are, put in your adjective. So now I treat them as someone to be disrespected. So now go back to the first line. You're not going to get the results you want. In fact, you're going to get results you don't want, and now you're stuck. So you have to have mutual respect, and respect comes from not, I'll listen to you, then you listen to me, then I'll repeat back what you said, and you'll repeat back what I said. It comes from a shared purpose and mutual respect. I don't have to like you, but I can respect you. If you can't get to that, then get help. You need help to resolve that conflict. It is mutual purpose and mutual respect that creates psychological safety. The 3 content things that need to be present in a crucial conversation if you're to be really effective having that conversation. First of all, you're clear about the things you want to say. Now, having those on hand enables you to stop thinking about the content. It's not to refer to it and read it like the Bible or the Charter. It's to actually park the content issues. During the conversation, you have to be hyper vigilant, not to the content, but to the conditions of the conversation. Are we relaxed? Have we got good eye contact? Are we in a good space where we have some privacy? Are we creating the conditions for psychological safety? Are we sticking to why we came together, or are we veering off chart? Am I feeling respected? And do I continue to respect the person? The conditions are the critical levers for getting a successful outcome. Because most of the time in difficult conversations, what we're angling to get is the conditions for listening. And those are highly dependent on the powers of observation you're all blessed with. Emotional intelligence. Can you read people accurately? Now, if you've never had your emotional intelligence measured, reach out to us or your person of choice and get a diagnostic done. Our recommended diagnostic is a diagnostic called MESCEIT, M-S-C-E-I-T, Mayer-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. There are 300 diagnostics that purport to measure emotional intelligence. There are 13 good ones and only one that is a test of your ability to solve problems using emotional information. In our experience, a lot of people who end up in conflict are doing something very curious. They're not looking at people's faces. They're looking away, they're looking down, they're looking at the wall behind the person, but they're not looking at a person's face because they're scared or angry. If you don't look at a person's face when you're talking to them, then you will predict their emotional state. And Byron Katie would suggest, as would the Human Synergistics Lifestyle Inventory, if you've done it, that probably 7 out of 10 times you are simply wrong. We don't read each other properly because we stop looking. You need to read the room. So take a sip. You need to read the room accurately. You need to look at people's faces. You need to look with a view to understanding what are they feeling. If I'm feeling intimidated, I'm actually looking to validate the threat. They are aggressive. I can see them being aggressive. You don't know that if you haven't dealt with how you're feeling, because you're going in feeling fearful, then you will be looking for a threat. That's what the human brain does. The science suggests that when you feel threatened, you go into the limbic system, you respond like an animal to a threat. You are on high alert for a threat to you personally. That threat can also be domination of fact, loss of position, and the threat diminishes your ability to see what's actually happening. Build your skills on reading people's faces and reading the room. So I'm sure little Sarah, my compadre in this event, is watching the time and being deeply impressed that I'm sticking to time. When you feel that you can't read people accurately, one of the ways you can tell you're misreading people is if you are often disappointed that what you thought was alignment isn't. What you thought was a positive take on something that happened isn't. You misread people's cues. You might be overestimating the positive reactions. On the other hand, you might be skeptical or even cynical of other people's intentions. And so you're always prepared for the worst. Either way, you're not reading faces accurately. The only way to read faces accurately is to be neutral and to look with a view to understand. Reading a room is all about picking the mood in a room. What mood in the room can you see and feel is not dictated by what you feel. If you carry a big emotion into a room, then you are part of the problem, not part of the solution. Your emotion, one, is highly contagious. They read it the moment you walk into the room. Two, it doesn't enable you to facilitate getting the right emotion to resolve the conflict, which should be openness, curiosity, a willing to listen and to respect. So I'm now going to open it up, and I think we can do this for 5 minutes. Thoughts, observations, questions. I will stop sharing the screen for a moment if we can, Twee, and open it up to the audience. Comments in the chat, questions in the chat. We've got a couple of people curating. Hi, Jody. Yes, the 3 reasons, very effective with many people. So questions or observations that you've got. And, you know, if you're thinking it, please get it in there because lots of other people will be thinking it as well. Okay, how do we prepare? That's a great question to give bad news. I could run a whole lunchtime session on that because that's a performance issue or it's a restructuring issue. The first thing you must always do when delivering what you consider to be bad news is check in why you consider it to be bad news. The fact that you consider it to be bad news already tells me that you're triggered. So let's say you need to tell someone that there's a performance issue. Then you have to believe that when I give someone feedback on performance, they have the opportunity to learn and grow. If I go into the room believing the reaction will be bad, then I've already taken an emotional state into the room. The second thing I would say is if you feel it's bad, what do you need to do to get into a neutral state? And if they're coming into the meeting feeling it's bad, what are you going to do to help them get to a neutral space? Because to hear feedback about a restructure, a job, or a performance issue, I have to come to that conversation supported, constructive, and curious. If you are delivering someone else's shocking news because the performance management is done badly, or the restructure is an excuse for performance management, or downsizing or outsourcing, as it's euphemistically called when you fire people, make sure that the people responsible for these decisions are part of the journey and that you have really good methodology to support the person psychologically. There's good methodology for supporting the transition, and that support is available the second your meeting is over. That does a couple of things. It helps you know you're supported, and it helps the person know they are supported. Dattner Group handled the wind-up of Circus Oz, and we were on the ground the minute the decision was made, and this is an iconic organisation, and in the outplacement of all the leaders involved, who then went on to actually manage the buyback of the idea and gain the chance to continue the circus in a different form. It was about recognizing, respecting, and valuing deeply their thoughts and ideas and contributions. We couldn't change the decision, but we could change how they felt. Okay, I'm losing track of the questions. Sarah, how are we going? Lots of good questions coming in. When you're facilitating in a group setting and you see a conflict, do you have any tips on how to support the group to pause? Well, the first thing is exactly that, Jess. You know exactly what to do. The first thing you do is you simply say, look, folks, I'm going to suggest we pause for a moment. Can we take a 2 to 3 minute break? Everyone takes a 2 to 3 minute break and they come back into the room. And you say calmly and neutrally, what I noticed just before that break is we were getting off track and it felt like people were getting upset. Was I reading that accurately? Did anyone else feel that way? Well, I think we need to stop the proceedings and deal with what happened in the room. And how can we all get it back on track? So that would be the first thing I do. You have to stop. Do not progress with a meeting when people are getting upset. Stop, take a pause, invite people to talk about what just happened. Well, I got upset because Zoe suddenly took us off a tangent and she said something that I found really threatening. Okay, so what in that was threatening? Zoe, can you share with us what your intention was? Well, I didn't mean to do that. And I do apologise. What I wanted to add into the conversation was, okay, are you happy with that response, everybody? Well, no, I'd like to know a bit more about that. Zoe, I noticed that happens in meetings quite a bit. I'm curious to know why that's happening. I think, I realise, again, I apologise, I'm not coming in sufficiently prepared. You have to facilitate the conversation on the problem that just emerged, not why you're having the meeting. When you've resolved it, come back to your meeting.
Another one, Fabe, from Amy. What are your tips for connecting and reading the room when it's online?
Oh, right. Okay, well, the first thing is cameras on. Always have cameras on. And you'll notice, even in the way I'm here now with you, that we want your cameras on always as much as we can. But I will lean in. And what I'm often doing when I'm leading in is I'm looking carefully at you. If I sit back like this, I can't see you. Good online protocol is when you can see a good third of me. So if you look at Talia Bassett, that's pretty good online protocol. Look at Kay, look at Kylie. So we need to see you. But when you are back here and your surroundings are 2/3 of your screen, then it is impossible to read each other. If you have a small meeting, you can go to speaker view so that you can see the facial expressions. So that's a crucial key. You have to be visible. So if I look at Clinton right now, Clinton, the screen is like this and it's like this. So it's very hard to read your face, and your background is 70% of the background. So you would move forward and allow your face to be more present on screen. Even more, Clinton, if you want to experiment, and I would tilt my screen down a little bit. So take the camera and just, a little bit more. Hello, there you are. And if we can see a bit more of you, and if your screen is bouncing back, then put something under the back of your screen. You don't want people to look up at you and you don't want people to look down at you. Online protocol is a whole other session we could do. Sarah.
Yeah, we've probably only got time for one more question before we've got to wrap it up. But Kay has written, one of the issues at my work is there is a lot of office whining gossip, but when the group is asked in a meeting to raise any problems, they don't talk. Any tips on how to manage this?
Yes, that's one of my favorites. The first thing is the meeting and the team is all about whining and gossip. You have a conversation with your team. I'm noticing something that's happening for all of us. When we're out and about in the business, I think we're doing a fair dose of gossip. Has anyone noticed we're gossiping a bit? Hands up who think they've said something to somebody else that they're not comfortable saying in public domain. We're having sidebar conversations. I'm noticing that. Is there anyone else noticing that? I'm going to make a pledge to you all. I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'm going to invite you to consider how we stop doing that as a group. Now, maybe I'm the problem if I'm the leader of the group, and I'm going to exit from the group, and I'm going to give you some space to talk about why are we doing that? Why are we gossiping? Why are we whining? And I leave the room, let them have a chat, give them half an hour to talk about it, come back. Was there any sense of why that's happening? We don't feel safe with you, Fabi. We don't think we can bring up issues. One person speaks for the group, which is a really safe thing to do. We don't think we can bring up the issues safely. Okay, what do I need to do to make that easier for everybody? Do we agree if I do that thing, it'll be a bit easier? Can we track that thing? So name the problem. Name the problem. Don't judge the silence. When people are silent, they're still thinking. They're still thinking. They're just not telling you what they think. And you can start a campaign to stop gossiping. Gossiping is terrible. It's very corrosive, and it's blame and judgment. So it immediately will create crucial conversations. And gossiping in a business about a person is both deeply hurtful and deeply unconstructive. So it's a great question. We've got a lot of questions. We might do our best to answer this when we send out material from this session. We might see if we can give you short paragraph answers to these questions, because there are so lot. Just want you to know, first of all, hands up if you found this useful. Has this been useful? Okay, great. That's great. Lots and lots of hands. Okay, so 3 things that we do. If I can get you to go back and share the last slide. We're doing this because we're cause related, and it's important that you know we fight every day of our lives for human beings to work more effectively together, for leaders to come down from hierarchy and work with people, to ensure men and women feel seen and heard. And we know that it is perfectly legitimate to get help. There are 3 ways we can do that for you if you need help. If you find after this conversation this thing isn't going away, ask us for some support. Number 1, we do a huge amount of coaching one-on-one. Number 2, we do lots and lots of team development at all levels, from boards and executives to senior leaders to middle manager to frontline. And resolving conflict in teams is bliss, because they live with a huge amount of challenge and disruption and angst and worry and anger and frustration for a year. And I promise you, in 48 hours of good process, we shift the conversation, routinely shift the conversation, because now we give people the tools of listening and seeing and not getting embroiled in data fights, which is the time we live in. For the women on the call, you would know about our Compass flagship program. This is a 7-month, it's 7 days, 3 lots of 2 days and a 1 day. And we do our best to deeply tool you up. And the third one, and we have a program starting in May for those of you who've done leadership development and want to take the next step forward. We have a glamping retreat starting the 2nd of May, and that is limited. So I think we've only got 3 spots left. It's limited because we want to work together on issues we're trying to change and we're stuck. So the 20 women come from very, very diverse backgrounds, and we work together to get a shared outcome. So thank you for coming. Thank you for staying online. Very proud to have so many of you here. What we want you to know is we will be beside you always. We will send you material that we think will help. We will have public forums as often as we are able to organise it. We are always here, and even if you have no money, ring us, contact us, and we'll give you tips. Our world has to change the way we are talking together. We have to be courageous, accountable, we have to collaborate, and we have to be curious in what is possible. So big hugs to you all. If you want to stay on and have a bit of a chat, we've got a number of the team are here. Stay on, but otherwise, happy Wednesday afternoon, and we will see you somewhere down the line. Thank you so much for being here and trusting us to support you. Thank you.